So a few months ago, we took a pretty early look at a service called Pangolin. We did a live stream first look, and then I made a dedicated tutorial video that was a bit shorter and more to the point. But if you're not already familiar with Pangolin, their GitHub says this. Pangolin is a self-hosted tunneled reverse proxy server with identity and access control designed to securely expose private resources on distributed networks. That's a lot of information, but it is fairly concise as far as everything that Pangolin does. Basically, you can think of this as a self-hosted alternative to something like Cloudflare tunnels. Pangolin lets you remotely access your self-hosted services via a domain, but without the need for port forwarding like you might experience with a lot of other reverse proxy solutions. Now, since the release of my previous videos, there have been several changes to Pangolin that I thought would be interesting to take a look at in this video. But before we get into that, there are a few disclaimers that I need to make for my sanity and maybe yours as well. Number one, if you've already got a reverse proxy or remote access solution that works for you, that's awesome. Keep using what works for you. I'm not trying to tell you why you should use Pangolin over what you already have that's working. This is just a demonstration of Pangolin and showing some of the new updates and features. Number two, yes, there are absolutely other ways that you could accomplish the same things that I'm going to show in this video. This is just one option on how you can remotely access your home lab without port forwarding. Again, if you've already got a solution that works for you, keep rocking that and do your thing. Number three, for the full tunneling functionality to work, you will need a remote host. Most people are going to find that using an inexpensive VPS is a great solution, and that's what I'm going to be using for this demonstration. If, however, you're of the mindset that using a third-party remote solution that you're managing isn't true self-hosting, that's fine. Again, this solution may not be for you, and that's fine as well. Number four, this solution will be using Docker to facilitate the services that we're using for this setup. I won't be going into how to install or use Docker because some fundamental knowledge of Docker should be understood before using it to remotely access your home lab. And number five, one last thing that I thought of as I was working on other parts of this project. I am not the developer. I am not associated with this project in any way. If you have questions about functionality, features, errors, etc., I'm not going to be able to help you nearly as much as the developers and their community will. They've got a GitHub and a Discord where you'll have a better time getting answers. Of course, I will have those linked in the video description. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk a bit more about Pangolin since that's why we're here. Actually, first, Milo and Owen, the developers of Pangolin, have a quick message for you.
Hi, I'm Owen. I'm Milo, and we're the developers and co-maintainers of Pangolin. We've had a home lab for a while, and we've always struggled to piece together many different components to create something like Pangolin. So ultimately, we decided one package solution was the best way to do it. We just released Pangolin back in January this year, and it's been a crazy meteoric rise since then. We really got to thank the community for all their support, including David for that initial video. We really appreciate all the engagement. We're already up to 8K stars on GitHub, which is crazy. Maintaining a solid community around Pangolin is our #1 priority. It's ultimately what keeps all these open source projects successful and alive. We want to be able to spend as much time on Pangolin as possible to continue to grow the product and the community around it. That's why we're working on monetization, which is tough in open source projects, but we're figuring it out with the community. We introduced the supporter program as the first step into this, which has been going pretty well. We've also recently announced that we've dual licensed Pangolin to support both our community and business offerings. Businesses often want support, so we have to provide them with a more flexible license that can give them what they need. We're always going to keep feature parity between both the community and professional editions of Pangolin because the community is the most important part of this project. We're eager to keep building Pangolin to make it as great as it can be, and we really hope you give it a try.
Now, I think the biggest changes since my first round of videos is the addition of identity providers, CrowdSec, and multiple domains. After confirming this with the developers, they also mentioned raw TCP UDP resources that are still being worked on, access tokens in headers via share links for apps like Image, and API keys. Now, I don't want to get too much into the weeds on what each of these things are or what they do, just so we can keep the video relatively short and to the point. And as per usual, links to everything will be in the video description. Hi, this is Future David. I just took out several minutes of this video while doing the edit for it that explained the different components of Pangolin, and it kind of explained how each of those components works in conjunction with the other. And if you'd like to know more about that, there's a great section on their website that you can read for yourself that explains the different components, has a nice little diagram here, and kind of explains more about that in a much simpler fashion than I did for several minutes. So let's take a look at my new Pangolin setup, and we'll touch on a few points along the way, and then we'll talk about the installation process after that. Okay, so this is my Pangolin dashboard as we see it when I first log in. Here we can see that I'm a member of one organization because that's all I need for my very, very basic setup. We can click that if we want to, and we will here in a minute. But if we take a look at the top left, we've got our logo, we've got a home button, we've got server admin. If we click this, it will take us over here where we can see users, API keys, identity providers, and licenses. We'll talk about that stuff later, but just know that you can access it from that homepage just by clicking server admin. So we've also got a buy supporter key. We're going to talk about supporter key stuff later, just as a preemptive thing so you don't jump the gun. There's nothing being paywalled here. It's just a matter of being able to support them a couple of different ways if you feel the need to. There's also, again, no organizations down here. I can create new organizations down here as well, but that's not really kind of why we're here. What we want to do next, though, is click on My Organization, the one I have for my setup. And when we're here, we get more information, as you would expect, right? So again, across the top, we get our breadcrumbs that let us know where we are in Pangolin, which I appreciate. We've got sites. You can think of sites as your networks or your physical locations where you might try to access something remotely. Maybe you've got a server there, you've got something there that you want to access remotely. Each of those different locations would be a site. That might also apply to different subnets on your network. You might have multiple subnets as sites. It's just one of those things that you can kind of configure whichever way makes the most sense for you. So next we've got resources, and resources are basically going to be the different services or applications that you're trying to remotely access. Here we can see that I've got a few in here that I've been messing with. And you might also notice over here under the access spot where we've got these different URLs, we've actually got multiple domains here. And this is one of the big new features with the newest releases of Pangolin. But while we're here, we can see the name, we can see which site it's attached to, the protocol, the access URL, the authentication, whether it's protected, enabled, or we can click edit. We can click on here and we can see even more information, right? The information we just saw a moment ago. Do we want HTTPS and TLS enabled on this? We can say yes or no. We've got additional TLS information in here that we can access. Below that, we've got target configuration. Currently, there's just one target here. This is the IP address and port of the application that we're trying to access. This is currently being accessed on HTTP. However, let's say you had a situation where, I don't recommend this, but just for the sake of demonstration, let's say you wanted to access Portainer remotely, and you've got that on port 9443, right? What you could do in that case is change this to HTTPS because the container has a self-signed certificate built into it. And in order for that to work, we need to switch this to HTTPS. I don't need to do that for this specific application and this part of the demonstration, but just know that if you have an application that has its own self-signed certificate in it, you will need to change this method from HTTP back to HTTPS. There's also H2C, which honestly, I don't know what that is. I've never actually dug into that. The other thing that I want to bring up right here real quick, under target configuration, I'm going to switch that so I don't forget. Adding more than one target above will enable load balancing. Now, I've never actually done anything with that, but it's there if you want to give it a try. Maybe let me know in the comments how that works out. Again, it's never something that I've actually used, but it's there. We can enable or disable our resource from here, or we can delete it. Of course, we can save our targets after we've made changes. And then we've got additional proxy settings with custom host headers that we can throw in there if we need to do that. And then, of course, again, click proxies or save proxy settings down here, which my dumb face is in the way of. There's an orange button behind my face on the screen that you can't see. And you can kind of, if I scroll but there it is, kind of a little bit. Anyway, you get the idea. There's a save button there. Below that, we get access control. And here we can manage users. I've just got one user. We can see my username, my identity provider, and the role of that particular user. But we can also click on create user. We can do an internal or an external user. In order for this to work, though, you do need to have an identity provider enabled. We'll talk about that briefly here in a little bit, though. We've also got roles that we can set up. The two default roles are admin and member, though we can add additional roles. You could call them departments or whatever you want to call them, but it's just another way to give granular control or granular access to two different resources as you see fit, whether it's based on user, role, whatever the case is. You can use this for granular access to different resources, or yeah, I guess resources is actually the right word. I thought I was trailing, but I wasn't. Anyway, next we can do like shareable links. Here I've got an access or a shareable link for Papra, but if I wanted to, I could create a shareable link. I could select the resource. So this does have to be a resource that you've already got built, a service you've already got built with access. You can select it, you can give it a title, and you can have it expire or never expire if you wanted to do that, and give a separate link for that. Next, we've got API keys. I haven't actually dug into the API key stuff or the API stuff. I know that the documentation on Pangolin's docs page is pretty intense on the API stuff, though just know that if you need it, there's an API key section here where you can manage different keys and that sort of thing. We've also got settings over here, and this is just going to be settings for the organization that you administer or have the option to administer. You can change the organizational name, or you can delete the organization entirely if you've got the appropriate permissions to do that. Below that, we've got server admin. Let's just jump into this real quick. We've got users. Again, it's not going to show the owner, the primary user, that is me, but you can see other users in here if there were any. Again, more API stuff in here where you can generate a key. Identity provider is exactly that. This is where you can add an identity provider to your setup. You can give it a name. You can auto provision users. So maybe you've got something like maybe your OAuth 2 or your OIDC provider is, say, like your Google suite, and you've got like 10 users in there. You could then add all of that information down here and then be able to import users from your Google suite or your GitHub suite or your whatever OIDC provider you want to use. You can set that up in here and auto provision users in your Pangolin setup if that's the route that you want to go. Again, not something I use because it's just me managing things, but just know that Identity Providers is here and actually looks relatively simple to set up if that's your shtick. And then next we've got licensing. We're going to talk about licensing later on in this video with a bit more detail about the reason for licensing and how licensing works. So we're not going to do that right now. Just know that it is a section in the admin area of Pangolin. So now that we've taken a look at the different pages or the different sections of Pangolin, there are a couple of different sections that I want to take a bit of a deeper look at. That's going to be sites and resources. So let's jump over to sites real quick. So this is where we will manage our different sites. Again, think of sites like subnets or physical locations that you might try to access using Pangolin. From here, we can manage the existing site that we have. You know, we can see its status. We can see the site name, which is a random string of words that it's put together. We can see the data transferred in and out, and we can see the connection type here. If we wanted to, we could edit this, but I think it's more important that we actually take a look at how to add a new site here. So we're going to call this test remote, right? It doesn't matter what I call it. This is just for demonstration. Now, next we've got a few different options on how we want to use this site. We can use the Newt tunnel, we can use a basic WireGuard, or we can use this for locally or for like a local reverse proxy without tunneling. Now, they recommend using Newt tunneling, and that's honestly the only real route that I've gone through with this. When I first set this up back in like January, I did look at the local option. But I think Newt tunneling is really why most of us are going to be here, because we want to have the ease of use and flexibility of being able to remotely access our services without any port forwarding and that sort of thing, but still using a domain. So we're going to use the Newt tunnel for this. Now, the next section is going to be the credentials here. We can see our Newt endpoint, our Newt ID, and our Newt secret. It's not going to matter if you see this. This is not going to be accessible to you, by the time this video goes up. You will want to probably copy these different things just so that you've got them available to you later if you need them. That said, store them somewhere safe and secure that's not publicly accessible. That's just security advice from me. Once you've done that, you can click I've copied the config. And then we've got a few different options on how we want to install Newt. Again, this is going to be the agent that we're going to install locally on our home lab, wherever that happens to be. That could be, the home lab like that's behind me. It could be at a friend's house or wherever, right? This is going to be that tunneling agent that we install wherever we want access to our services. So we've got our operating system is either gonna be Linux, Docker, Podman, Mac OS, Windows, or FreeBSD. From there, like on Linux, we've got AMD 64, ARM 64, ARM 32. You can read all of that. I don't need to read it to you. Now, most of us, again, are going to be using Docker. So we can click Docker and we can see that we've got Docker Compose or we've got Docker Run. So we can just copy this, and it's got all of our config information that it showed us up here is all down here already ready to go. And that's for the Docker Compose, and actually the same for Docker Run. You can run this a couple of different ways. That said, in the Docker Run command, it would be nice if there was a -D in here so that we didn't have to keep that terminal window open to keep the Docker agent, or the Pangolin agent, the Newt agent, pick one. To keep that agent running without having the terminal window open, it would be nice to have a -D in there. Just a little side note there. Once we've got this part, we can then deploy that agent via our terminal. Again, whether that's using the Docker Run or the Docker Compose. And I say terminal, but you could also use, Dockage or Portainer, or however you wanted to deploy this if you wanted to go the Docker Compose route as well. Once you've got that deployed, or once you've got this copied and deployed, you can click on Create Site. And then eventually that site will come online and we'll see that status change right here. Now, I'm obviously not going to deploy this, but that's how easy it is to deploy an agent on your local network to give yourself easy remote access. So the next thing we're going to talk about real quick is resources. And again, you can think of resources as, the services or the applications that we're trying to remotely access. So if we jump over to my desktop, here we can see some of the services that I've got available in here. I can click on hordis.dbtech.dev, pop that open, and hey, look, there it is. Or I've got Papra on papra.dbtech.dns.dev. Again, just pop that open, and there it is. Just that quickly and easily, right? But let's take a look at how to actually add a resource to our Pangolin setup. We'll click Add Resource. We'll give it a name. I'm going to call this Arcane. We actually just did a live stream about this recently. Our site name, or our site below that, we've got home or test remote. I'm going to put this on home. Next, we're going to decide, is this going to be an HTTPS resource or a raw TDP UDP resource? Now, for the sake of this particular application, we're just going to go with HTTPS. If you've got an application that requires the other, make that selection and fill in the information there. Again, I'm going to use the HTTP resource. We've got the option below that of, do we want it to be a domain or a subdomain, or a base domain or a subdomain? I'm just going to click subdomain. I'm going to call this Arcane. Oops, I'm going to call it Arcane if I could spell correctly. And then I've got the option to select between the two different domains that I have pointed to this server. Now I'm just going to use dbtech.dev for this. Again, for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to select that one. I'm going to click on Create Resource. Now, this is where we tell it where to go, right? We can say, hey, this is going to use, we want to enable SSL for this, so we're going to leave that checked. If we don't want that, uncheck it. We've got additional TLS settings that we can do here for this. I've never actually used that, so I'm not going to speak on that. Below that, we've got HTTP, HTTPS, or H2C. I'm just going to use HTTP because I don't believe this service uses a self-signed certificate. So I know that we're on port 3000 there, and I'll click Add Target. And again, I can add additional targets here if I wanted to have load balancing, but I'm not worried about that for what we're doing right now. So I'll click Save Targets. It says it's been saved, and then I'm not going to worry about the proxy settings for the custom host header, things like that. So at this point, this there it is, just that quickly and easily. We added this resource to our Pangolin instance with very, very little effort. So now let's see how to get Pangolin up and running. Now, the first thing we're going to want to do is actually jump over to docs.fossorial.io, and that's where we are right here. And we're going to see that this is a pretty lengthy page full of information that covers everything from a general overview to choosing a VPS to installing Pangolin and deeper dives on the different elements that makes Pangolin do what it does. Now, I cannot encourage you enough to read through their documentation, as this project is still in active development. So what you see in this video may not be completely accurate whenever you watch this video. So please, again, refer to their official documentation for the most up-to-date information if you've got any questions about something that doesn't seem to work in this video. Now, jumping into the installation process, you're going to need a few things. First, you're going to need a remote server with a public IP address, and this is the VPS element I mentioned in the beginning of this video. Now, I'm using RackNerd for my setup, and it's worked out great for me. I will have an affiliate link to them in the video description, but if you've got another option available, then go ahead and use that. I do want to mention, though, that Pangolin does recommend using Debian or Ubuntu for your base operating system. Also, your VPS is going to need to have ports 80, 443, and 51820 available on the internet for the flow of traffic. Next, you're going to need a domain name. Now, you're going to want to point your domain name to your VPS's IP address, like I've done here. Now, I've deleted all of the records on my domain settings and just have a wildcard A record to just have everything from that domain point to my VPS. Now, you can adjust your setup as necessary for your needs. And look, I buy all of my domains from Porkbun, but you can buy your domains from wherever makes the most sense for you. Next, I think number 4 here is you're going to need an email address for your SSL creation and renewals. This will just get entered during the setup process of Pangolin. You've probably already got an email address if you're online, so well done on being that prepared. Next, you're going to need a local home lab, and by local, I mean your home, your office, wherever you're trying to access remotely. Next, this one's optional, but having an SMTP server available is helpful for doing things like password resets and different forms of authentication with Pangolin. Now, there is one other thing that isn't mentioned in the official Pangolin instructions, but I feel that it's important for me to mention it here. Make sure that your VPS or your remote server is secure. Create a sudo user that isn't root. Create SSH keys for that user and install them. Disable SSH for the root account. Disable password authentication. Make sure that your server's up to date. The list really could go on for a really long time, but just make sure that your remote server is secure to make sure that your entire setup is as secure as you can make it. So now that you have your remote server set up and secured, we can move into the actual installation of Pangolin. Now, there are a few different installation methods listed in the Pangolin docs. For instance, here we've got an installer script. Over here, we've got a Docker compose that you can use. And there's also an unraid setup that you could use if you're in that platform, but I'm not, so I can't necessarily speak to the unraid configuration process. But just as a bit of a heads up here, they all use Docker containers, so the end result is the same in the long run. Now, that said, I've tried both the installer script and the Docker compose, and honestly, I've had the best results using the install script. It creates all of the files and folders for you and fills out all of the files automatically based on the information that you provide during the setup process. So that's the method that we're going to use in this tutorial. This is the same method that I used in my previous video on Pangolin. Now, I know that a large number of people won't like just running an installer script on their setup, and I get that. So if you'd like to manually create the file and folder structures needed to manually deploy this, those instructions are in the docs on the Pangolin website, so feel free to check those out. Okay, so here we are on my desktop. We can see that I've got a split screen thing going on here. The left side of the screen is the Fossorial docs with the installer information, and the right side is where I've already SSH'd into my remote server. Now, we're going to run a couple of commands here to get this to work. Now, the first command, which is this one right here, will download the installer script for your operating system and make the file executable. The second script, which is this one right here, will actually run the install script and will start asking you some questions. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just run this command. Okay, so it looks like it's completed everything it needs to there. It has downloaded everything, and hopefully it has also made that installer file executable. So what we can do is just /installer, right? Oops, it helps if I spell it right. Installer. Oops. So we're going to do sudo installer, and then it's going to ask me for my password. Cool. So we're going to want to enter our base domain for this. This is going to be, yoursite.com or whatever it happens to be. Now I've got this domain over here, which is going to be, in this case, dbtech.tube. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. And I think at this point, I can come over here and we can just go this route. I'm going to make this a little bigger so it's easier for you guys to read. I should have done that earlier. I apologize. So now we want to enter the domain for the Pangolin dashboard. By default, it's going to be pangolin.dbtech.tube. That is fine by me for the sake of what we're doing here. I'm just going to hit enter because because it's already in there, it should automatically enter that for us. Now it wants an email address for our SSL certificate. So we'll enter those, or that, I guess. And do you want to use Gerbil to allow tunneled connections? The default is yes. So yes, that is what I want to do. So now by default, the admin user for this is going to be admin@dbtech.tube. I don't like that. So I'm just going to enter my email address. And then I'll enter my password. Now this is the password that I want to log in with. So that's what I'm going to enter here. And it's like, hey, let's make sure you didn't screw that up. Do you want to disable sign up without invite? Yes, I do. I don't want just anyone to be able to install things. So I'm going to say yes, oops, like so. Do you want to disable users from creating organizations? For my use case, the answer to that is yes, so that's what I'm going to type here. So this part is what I had mentioned earlier in the video, where this part's kind of optional. Do you want to enable email functionality, yes or no? If you say yes, then you will need an SMTP server for your setup, and you're just going to enter things like the SMTP server address, the port you want to use, the username, and the password for all of that. For the sake of what I'm doing here, because I'm sure you guys can handle typing that information in, I'm going to say no. Docker is not installed. Would you like to install it? Yeah, let's do that. That's handy. That's what's great about this script is it automatically installs the necessary prerequisites for everything we need here. So I'm going to say yes. Okay, so here we are a couple of minutes later. The setup has actually done all of the updates that it needs to do, and it's installed Docker for us. So now it's asking, based on the information you've provided, would you like to install and start the containers? And yeah, let's do that. So I'm gonna say yes. So here we can see that it's pulling traffic, Pangolin, and Gerbil presently. So we'll give this a minute to do its thing, and then we'll come back. Cool. So this is also one of the optional things that I had mentioned earlier, and it's asking, would you like to install CrowdSec? Now, for the extra layer of security that you get with CrowdSec, it's probably a good idea to add it. Also, adding different kinds of security to CrowdSec based on the apps that you're remotely accessing is actually pretty straightforward once you figure it out, and I will cover that later. But again, the CrowdSec portion of this is completely optional. So for the sake of demonstration later, I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I do want to install CrowdSec. And then it's like, hey, here's some more information. Are you willing to manage your CrowdSec? If you say no, it won't do it. So say yes here as well. They've got no there as a default so that they don't have to deal with complaining when people accidentally install it and don't know how to configure it. So I'm going to say yes here. So it's going to go ahead and stop everything. Then it's going to add CrowdSec to this and bring everything back up. So at this point, our installation is complete. So if everything has worked, and I haven't tested this, so we're going to find out in real time, I should be able to go here and go here. And hey, look at that. So let's center this so it makes a bit more sense for what we're doing here. And now I can enter my username and password that I set up during this installation process. Okay, so this is our first login. I'm actually really happy that that worked in real time. So the first thing we need to do is create an organization. Of course, I'm just going to call this dbtech, like so, and then I'll create my organization. Next, we're going to create our first site. Now, keeping in mind that sites can kind of be thought of as like locations or subnets or things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a site called local lab. Again, we've got a couple of different ways that we can install this. We're going to use the Newt tunnel method just because it is the recommended method, and that's kind of what we're here for. So we're going to do this. Below that, we've got our Newt endpoint. This is where we are right now at pangolin.dbtech.tube. We've got our Newt ID and our Newt secret key. Again, I'm going to click that I've copied that, and then I'm actually going to open a notepad and do that. It doesn't matter if you see this stuff. I know there was some stuff I blanked out earlier in this video because I'm recording this like a week after the first part of this video. This part really doesn't matter because I'm going to shut this server down when I'm done with this video. So copied the config. We're good there. So at this point, again, like I mentioned earlier in the video, we've got a few different ways that we can do this. Again, I want to use Docker, but if you don't want to use Docker, there are several other ways that you can do this. So I'm going to click Docker right here. And we've got a Docker option. We've also got a Docker run option. Again, I think I mentioned earlier in the video that I wish that this was Docker run -D just so that we can have it detached from the terminal window that we're going to open here in a couple of minutes. So the next thing I need to do is actually get logged in to a node or something on my network where I can install this to give myself access to other resources on my home lab. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to come back. Okay, so here we are. We're logged in as root. Don't do this. This is my testing server. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm logged in to my testing server as root, and we're going to come back over to our new Pangolin dashboard here, and we're going to decide on which way we want to run this. I'm just going to do it as a Docker run command. I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it in here, but then I am going to come back all the way to the beginning, and I'm going to add this -D to it again, just so that if we close this window, it doesn't shut down this this Docker container. So I'm going to hit enter. So now it's going to pull that and deploy it, and we'll give this a minute to finish up. Okay, so our Newt instance is up and running, and that's great. Now what we need to do is figure out, I've got a bunch of different containers over here that we can use for the sake of this demonstration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this IP address. I know that this is the IP address for this container that we're going to access. I do want to do Docker PS. I think it's running on port 3000. Am I wrong? I am wrong. It's on port 8080, right? So we've got this. We've created our site here. So I'm going to click Create Site. And we're going to give this just a second. Currently, it says that it's offline. But usually after a couple of minutes, this will switch from offline to online. Let's go over to Resources. And we'll just give this a minute. We'll set up our resource while we're waiting for those two things to connect. So what we're going to do is click on Add Resource. I'm going to call this Hortus. And again, we've got the option to select from a local or whatever sites we've got available here. I've just got local lab, so that's what I'm going to use. Again, this is going to be an HTTPS resource, and this is going to be, we're just going to call this Hortus. We're going to put this on dbtech.tube like we set up in this site, and then we'll click Create Resource. From here, again, we've got more information, the stuff that we just configured in the previous screen. Do we want SSO? Yes, we do. Our method here will be HTTP because, again, this container doesn't have a self-signed certificate. If it did, we would switch this to HTTPS. But again, we're going to do that. We're going to do that. And then I believe, again, this was on port 8080. Just verifying that right here. And then we'll click on Add Target. And that's really all we need to do here. So in theory, so it turns out, and you guys probably caught this before I did, I added my IP address and my port over here, and I clicked Add Ports, but I didn't click Save Target. We'll give this a second to refresh the cache there. Hopefully at this point, let's make sure 244. Of course, I did the wrong IP address because that's apparently the kind of day that I'm having here. So let's try this again. Right, we'll save targets. There we go. So you got to pay attention like I didn't. Again, kind of a weird day I'm having, I suppose. Okay, so let's do one more and try not to screw it up this time. So we're going to click on Add Resource. We're going to use Port Note Live over here. This is the IP address is right here. The port is right there on 3000. So I'm going to call it Port Note like so. Again, local lab, because that's what I've got. And as a result of choosing this and not creating a new site, we don't have to install a new Newt instance. That one Newt instance will be just fine for what we're going to do here. Again, we're going to use an HTTPS resource, not a TCP resource. I'm going to call it port, like so, at dbtech.tube and click create. So now we've got this. We're going to scroll down. We want to enable SSL. That's fine. Our method, again, HTTP. And then let's make sure we grab that IP address and put it on port 3000. Add target, save targets. We'll wait just a second so that everything can kind of do what it needs to do. And click our URL. And there it is. So the reason it is allowing me to log in right here like this is because I'm already logged into Pangolin, and I've got the authentication set to single sign-on. Now, if I opened this over here, then it's going to make me sign in as my Pangolin user for a bit of extra protection. But again, if you don't want that, you can come over here and you can disable that, or you can adjust based on role or user or whatever. But let's just disable it and click save. Again, we'll open a new window like so. And there it is, just that quick and easy. So one of the big new features that came out right after I released my first videos on Pangolin is the ability to have more than one domain pointed to our Pangolin setup. In order to do that, of course, you will need to point more A records from your other domains to your Pangolin instance here, your VPS, your remote server instance. And once you've got those A records set up, you can then log in to your server like I've done here, right? And we're already logged in to the server where I've already got Pangolin installed. So what I want to do is click type in ls, and here we can see all of the different files and folders that are available on our server as a result of installing Pangolin or whatever else you may have done besides Pangolin. What I want to do here, though, is do a cd into config and then do an ls. And here we can see we've got more files and folders. And what we want to look at specifically here is the config folder. So I'm going to do a nano. You can use VI or whatever your note or your editor of choice is. I like nano, so that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to do config like so. Actually, I lied. We're going to do this. All right. So let's minimize this to get it out of the way. And right here, we can see the entire configuration for our Pangolin setup. And you can scroll through here and look at all of this if you'd like to. What I want to do, though, is actually come up to here where it says domains. And right here, we can see it says domain 1, base domain cert resolver. All we have to do to add more domains into this, after we've added our A record to our other domains to point to this server, is just copy this. We're going to come down. We're going to change this to domain 2, and then whatever our other domain happens to be. Then we can do Control O and Enter and Control X, or however you need to save and exit for your editor. Once we've done that, there's nothing else in here we need to do right now. So we're going to do back. We're going to do an ls here as well. And here we can see we've got a docker-compose.yml file. And what we're going to do in this folder, now that we know we're in the right folder, is do a docker compose down. We'll give this a minute to bring all of our services down. And then once that's done, we'll bring all of our services right back up. And to do that, again, we're just going to docker compose, again, up, -D, so we don't have to leave this open. And there we go. So now everything is up and running again. So we can come back over to here. We'll come back to sites. We're just going to refresh just to make sure that everything is up and running. And then we're going to go back to resources. Let's edit one of our resources here. And we're going to scroll down. Oh, because I need to change the domain name right here. Now, I don't have dbtech.dev pointed here, but now once you've got that domain pointed to the server with all of the correct settings, same process as we saw earlier with pointing that A record, then we can actually start using multiple domains just by continuing to add more and more things to that config file with domain 1, domain 2, domain 3, etc. So now that we've gone through the process of adding additional domains to our Pangolin setup, let's now take a look at adding more security to our setup using CrowdSec. Now, this section of the video will only apply if you actually went through the process of installing CrowdSec during the initial setup. If you didn't, you will need to go through that process again. But this specific part of the video is specific. I can just keep saying that word. Is specific to the CrowdSec portion of things. So keep that in mind. So in order to add the additional security via CrowdSec, there's already some in there, but let's say you've got specific apps that you want to have an extra level of security for. We need to make sure that we're SSH'd into our remote server or our VPS. And we want to make sure that we can find this Docker Compose file right here. What we want to do is nano our Docker compose.yml file like so. And right here, we can see one of our first services right here is CrowdSec. And under that, we've got collections. Now, there's already some pre-installed, let's call them packages, or I mean, they call them collections, but collections is a weird word for me. So I may say packages. They're interchangeable here. So we've got CrowdSec security /traffic. We've got CrowdSec security. Let's come over to here. AppSec virtual passing or patching something. And then generic rules. Those are the three that are currently installed. So I just want to go to the end of the line and add a space. The next thing we want to do is Google CrowdSec collections. Right here, we've got our CrowdSec collections page, and no thanks. And we can just kind of start scrolling through here. And these are additional packages or collections that have security specific to whatever app you may have on your setup. Like here, let's just take a look at WordPress, right? Like there's a good chance that I would use this for WordPress. So what we can do in here is we can open this up and we can see what version it is and who it was made by. This is Crowd Security. This is good. And this is a virtual passing or patching collection suitable for WordPress websites. And right here, we can see the installation is this. This is if you install this more bare metal than what we're doing here with the Docker Compose. What we want to do, though, is we want to grab, I'm going to zoom in a little bit, I apologize. What we want to do is grab this part right here. This is kind of like your Docker maintainer and image, like you would see in a Docker Compose file. Let's actually look at that for the comparison here. Like we've got, let's scroll down a little bit. So like the image is Crowd Security /CrowdSec, right? This is very similar to that. So what we want to do is come over here and grab just this part right here. We're going to copy it. We're going to come back over to here and we're going to paste that in. Now that's just for WordPress. Let's add another one just for the sake of it. Maybe if I can find one that makes sense for me, that's WordPress, that's asterisk, Authelia, authentic. I guess, you know what, let's do Authelia. I don't use Authelia, but it's here. So again, same thing. We're just going to copy this like so. We're going to come back over to here. We're going to add a space to the end of this list of collections and paste that in. And then we'll do a save and exit. Now, all we need to do is a Docker Compose restart should work here. So we're going to do that. And if everything worked well, all of our new security implementations for the services that we've added via CrowdSec should be set up. And you can always check that by viewing the logs of your CrowdSec container. We can do Docker logs, CrowdSec because I didn't do that first. And you can then start viewing this through here to make sure that the things that you've added will show up appropriately. Or if you're using Portainer, you can also look through there. That might be a little bit easier. Now, of course, I just showed a couple of examples on on some different collections that you could add, and you can always add more collections as you need to, but you will want to keep in mind that if you add a bunch of collections, your response times might start to slow down as your VPS has to process those. So just be aware, the more you add, the more resources you may need to add to your VPS. That may or may not be the case depending on your setup, but just know that it is a possibility. So the last thing that we want to talk about in this video, which is something else that was added after my previous videos, that is licensing. There's been an additional licensing thing done with Pangolin, and I want to talk about that just a little bit. Obviously, the devs for Pangolin need to eat and pay bills and support their families and that sort of thing. So they've offered a professional license, and if we jump over to here, here we can see the information about licensing. And it says, this is for business and enterprise users who are using Pangolin in a commercial environment. If you're using Pangolin for personal use, you can ignore this section. So if you are going to use this in a professional or enterprise setting, you can come over here and click on purchase a license. You can decide how many seats you need, and then you can go to the purchase portal, and it will tell you how much you're going to be charged for that. Again, if you're using this in a home lab environment, this won't apply to you. Now that said, if you like Pangolin and would like to support the developers, even from a home lab perspective, you can buy a supporter key, which you can see right here, and you can choose which one you'd like to use. Now that said, you don't have to buy this. You're not going to get paywalled on anything. All of the features that are available for enterprise or professional use are also available for the home lab use. But again, if you want to support via home lab or for your home lab, you can purchase a supporter key and just help finance them directly if you want to do that. So I just wanted to bring that up because I know there was a bit of a kerfuffle initially when they started doing licensing. But again, you don't have to if you're using this for home lab. But I just wanted to show that you do have the option to support them that way if you'd like, and you're not going to get paywalled even if you don't. So that is Pangolin as of May of 2025. And it's kind of interesting to me to see how far the Pangolin project has come in just the last few months. Like, I genuinely feel like this is getting close enough for me where I might feel comfortable moving away from Cloudflare tunnels and using Pangolin. I would love to know your thoughts on Pangolin or the different things I did in this video that were kind of different from what I've been doing for so very, very long. And also, I'd love to know your thoughts on me getting the developers Milo and Owen involved in this video where they made their appearance early on. I really thought it was kind of cool that they were willing to do that and make an appearance here on the channel on this video specifically. So let me know your thoughts on all of that. And I think that kind of is everything I wanted to cover. If you haven't already, it'd be awesome if you liked and subscribed if you haven't. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So I want to thank you guys for spending a few minutes of your day with me here today, and I'll talk to you in the next video.